I am here to read you The Wild Robot again. We left off in the middle of chapter 60 because Alex started to dance and do the robot. So this might be a little bit of a repeat of what we read last time, but then we'll get to some new stuff. So here we are on the second to last page of chapter 60, I believe. So remember we left off and Rockmouth was attacking animals and Roz was trying to get to the bottom of why. Rockmouth used to live in the river, said Roz as the beaver shuffled over, but you trapped him in here when you built your dam. He has been angry about it ever since. That doesn't give him a right to attack my son, hollered Mr. Beaver. It certainly does not, hollered Mrs. Beaver. I'd be upset too, said Paddler softly. I'd hate to be kept away from my home. Mr. Rockmouth, you should have said something sooner. The fish looked up from the puddle with a frustrated expression that meant, I tried, but no one was listening. Well, the situation had to be remedied, and you can guess who rose to the occasion. Roz was determined to get Rockmouth back to his home. After she explored the nearby waterways, it became clear that she would have to carry the pike through the forest and across the great meadow to the nearest bend in the river. I need a large container, said Roz to the beavers. Something I can fill with water so Rockmouth can breathe while I carry him home. I could make it myself, but I thought you might like to help. It couldn't have been easy to overcome her anger with Rockmouth, but after Mrs. Beaver had a chance to cool off, she finally came around. I suppose we're partly to blame for this whole situation, she muttered. Then the beavers did the right thing, and together they carved out a wooden barrel for the fish. Here you go. Mrs. Beaver rolled the barrel over to the puddle where the robot and the fish were waiting. This should work nicely. Rockmouth, I hope you're happy back in the river. And just in case you were wondering, we also have my cat visiting again. All right. Always something. Rockmouth just flicked his tail in a way that meant, will someone please take me home now? Roz filled the barrel with water and the grumpy fish, and then they were off. She carried Rockmouth through the forest and across the meadow until she was standing on the riverbank. Welcome home, said the robot. Then she tipped the barrel and the fish plunked into the river. Rockmouth's face poked above the surface. He flashed a big toothy grin, and then he quickly swam away. Chapter 61, The Robot Stories. The story of how Roz helped Rockmouth spread through the river and across the island, and it's soon followed by other robot stories. There were stories of Roz growing gardens in dry, barren places. There were stories of Roz nursing sick animals back to health. There were stories of Roz creating ropes and wheels and tools for helping her friends. But most of the new stories were about the robot's wildness. You see, Roz had noticed that the wilder she acted, the more the animals liked her. And so she barked with foxes and sang with birds and hissed with snakes. She romped with weasels, she sunbathed with lizards, she leapt with deer. That spring was a very wild time for our robot. Chapter 62, The Return. So we can guess that the flock of geese are returning and hopefully Brightbill will be with them. It was a quiet afternoon on the pond, but the quiet was gradually overtaken by sounds not heard around there for many months. The sounds grew louder and louder, and then a flock of geese appeared above the trees. Honk, honk, honk. Most flocks of geese moved lazily through the sky and trail off in wobbly lines, but not this one. This flock was fast. It flew in a perfect V formation, and it was led by a small, graceful goose. The flock flew once around the pond before gliding down and gently splashing into the water. The geese gathered in a tight group in the middle of the pond. They floated there for a while, softly honking to one another. Then the leader broke away from the others. He swam straight, make sure you can see this, straight toward the nest, waddled into the garden, and fluttered up to his mother's shoulder. Welcome home, son, said Roz. It's good to be back, Ma, said Brightbill. Chapter 63, The Journey. After months of separation, Roz and Brightbill, mother and son, were together again, and they had so much catching up to do. They went into the nest, and the robot built a fire. Then the goose gazed into the flames and told the story of winter. This is what he said. We spent the whole first day of our migration flying over the ocean. It seemed like the ocean would go on forever. But just when the flock was getting tired, Longneck pointed to some tiny islands on the horizon. We flew down to one of the islands and ate dune grass and rested our wings. After a few days of hopping from island to island, we reached the mainland and continued over fields and forests. And then the snow began to fall. I'd never seen snow before, and at first I thought it was beautiful, but it just kept coming. The others explained the snow was early, that we were never supposed to see it. But there it was, piling up around us as we tried to sleep at night. Longneck worried that the weakest geese wouldn't survive, and he was right. We lost old Widefoot to that very first snowstorm. We tried to fly around the snowy weather, but we got completely lost. And the weather became even worse. Lakes and ponds and rivers began freezing over. We couldn't find food or water, so we ate snow, and that made us colder. We had trouble cleaning ourselves, and our feathers became dirty and heavy. The flock was in bad shape, but Longneck kept us moving. "We are geese," he squawked. "Geese keep going." One day we were struggling through a snow shower when we saw something called a farm. It had perfectly square fields and enormous buildings, and stomping her way through the farm was a robot. She looked just like you, Ma. Longneck sent me over to speak to the robot, but I couldn't understand anything she said, so I followed her around the farm and around a corner, and then I saw something I never expected. Plants. Bright, colorful plants. I didn't understand how plants could live in such cold weather, but then I saw they were actually inside a building. I learned later that the building was called a greenhouse, and it had clear walls made of something called glass. The robot pressed a button on the wall, the door slid open, and warm air came rushing out. I hadn't felt warmth in so long I had to follow her inside. Ma, it was like summer in there. The air was warm and sweet and sticky, and there were rows and rows of different plants. The robot didn't pay any attention to me, so I wandered around the greenhouse, nibbling on leaves, drinking from puddles. Then I heard a scratchy voice from behind me. "If I were younger, I would have killed you by now." Any guesses as to what might be in the greenhouse? I spun around and there was an old cat. She walked on stiff legs. Her fur was gray and clumpy. The cat's name was Snooks. She didn't seem very nice. But then she saw the other geese out in the cold with their faces pressed against the glass, and she told me how to open the door. "You can rest here," said Snooks as the flock hurried in, "but stay out of sight. Humans aren't as friendly as me." None of us knew what humans were, but we didn't care. We were just happy to be out of the cold. Loudwing was so happy she cried. The flock drank and ate and bathed and slept and stayed out of the way. Snooks showed us where to leave our droppings so they wouldn't be noticed, and for a few days the greenhouse was our home. Once or twice a day the robot would go outside and return with a box or a bag, but most of the time she stayed inside and quietly worked on the plants. There was a barn I had to explore. It was filled with animals and machines, piles of straw, and two robots. One robot was fixing a broken door when I walked in. She was using a loud spinning tool called a saw. She pushed the saw through a long piece of wood and dust shot into the air. Everything was going smoothly until the saw suddenly lurched forward and sliced through 3 of the robot's fingers. But she was fine. A minute later, there was a thump sound as she popped on a new hand. Then she went right back to using the saw again. The other robot worked with the animals, chickens, sheep, pigs, cows. They were all in cages. The chickens kept asking me how I'd gotten out of my cage. I was explaining I'd never had a cage when I heard panicked squawks coming from the greenhouse. I ran back and found that a human had discovered the flock. We didn't know what he was saying, but he looked really angry. Longneck tried to defend us. He got in front and spread his wings and honked, and the human wasn't afraid. He pulled out a shiny stick and pointed it right at Longneck. Snooks hissed, "Look out! He's got a rifle!" Suddenly, a bright beam of light shot out from the rifle, and Longneck slumped to the floor. He was dead, Ma. The flock was so scared. We fluttered around and honked and knocked over plants, but the human kept moving toward us, pointing his rifle. So I pecked the button to open the door. We ran outside into the cold and flew away as fast as we could. Without Longneck, the flock needed a new leader. Everyone wanted me to lead. I didn't know what to do, so I started by repeating Longneck's words. I squawked, "We are geese, and geese keep going." Then I took the point, and the flock spread out behind me. The weather had us all turned around. Nobody knew which way to go, so I just led straight south. We saw more robots and humans and buildings, but we didn't stop. We knew we were way off course when we saw the ocean again, but at least it was a little warmer by the water, so I decided to follow the coastline for a while. There were more buildings by the coast, most of them on land, some in the ocean. The ocean buildings were dirty and crumbling and leaning in different directions, but there weren't any humans or robots in those buildings, only sea creatures. We saw ships on the water, we saw ships on land, we even saw ships in the air. They buzzed through the sky like giant dragonflies, and we reached a place called a city, where thousands of buildings and robots and humans and ships were all close together. When we stopped to rest on a rooftop, we met a friendly pigeon named Graybeak. She had grown up there, so she knew everything about the city. She flew us over the towers and under the bridges and kept us away from the buzzing airships, and everywhere we went, there were robots. Some of the city robots were just like you, Ma, but others crawled on 6 legs, or rolled on wheels, or slid up and down the sides of buildings. Some robots were really small, some were really big. They moved things and cleaned things and built things and did every kind of job you can think of. Graybeak brought us down the ledge on the side of a building and told us to look through the windows. Inside was a family of humans. They had a Roz robot. When we looked in other buildings, we saw other humans with robots. Every human seemed to have a robot. I told Graybeak about you, Ma, and she wanted to show us one last place. We flew out to the edge of the city to a really big building called a factory. Graybeak brought us to the roof windows, and we looked down into the factory and saw machines building sparkling heads and torsos and limbs. There was a factory building robots. A machine held up a robot torso and put 2 legs under it, and they snapped it into place. They put feet under the legs, and they snapped that into place. It snapped arms, the shoulders, and snapped hands into the arms. A head was snapped onto the top. The robot was finished. Ma, it looked just like you. I think the factory is where you were built. I wanted to watch more robots being built, but it started snowing again, so we said goodbye to Graybeak and continued flying south. We saw fewer robots and humans and buildings and ships. The air became warmer. The snow disappeared. We started seeing other flocks of geese in the sky, so we followed them to the middle of a wide grassy field where there was a lake and hundreds of other geese. We finally reached wintering grounds. After all we'd been through together, our flock became very close. We kept to ourselves, eating and resting, remembering the geese we'd lost. But after a few weeks, we began to mingle with other flocks. We met geese from all over the world. They told us about their homes, their migrations, their troubles with winter weather. Every flock had lost geese on the way there. A few flocks didn't make it at all. Before we knew it, the early spring flowers were poking up. It was time to fly home. We followed our usual migration route north. We flew over fields and forests and hills, but we didn't see any signs of humans or robots. That was fine with us. Eventually, we reached the ocean and our island and our pond. And then I saw you. All right, well, that is it for today. Thank you.